Hi there, and welcome along. I'm the gardener Ben. It's mid-January and it's time that we started thinking about pruning our roses. And the first thing I wanted to say is there's no rush to get this particular job done. My advice is always to leave this into the back end of January, February, and even into March. Depending on how your season is and depending on your growing zone, you may even want to push this through into the very beginning part of April, depending on the weather and depending on your skill level. So there's no reason to get in a panic right now and rush out into the garden and start cutting things back. Here in mid-January in the UK, especially here on the south coast, on the outskirts of the New Forest where I am, the weather has only really just turned cold. The rose we're going to be working on today, you can see, is already producing fresh growth because it is so mild here all the time. I want to leave the plant to go as dormant as possible, drop as many leaves before we work on it. So there's absolutely no rush to get this job done whatsoever. If you have particularly young plants that have been in the ground for less than 24 months, my advice is you leave those to the very last. These particular rose that I'm going to be working with today is Elizabeth from David Austin Roses. This particular rose is now coming into its third year in its pot with myself. That means the plant is some 5 or 6 years old and would now be classified as a mature specimen. So it's got plenty of strong, nice woody growth on it, and I can prune it nice and early without fear of it dying back, or the fact that I can't actually see where the buds are coming from. And if you're particularly unexperienced, looking at where the buds actually appear from is really important, especially with roses like Harlow Carr and the Country Parson, which have many thorns indeed, and it's very difficult to tell what is a bud and what is a barb. So it's sometimes best to leave those roses right to the back end of the season. If you missed this tutorial, do not panic. I'm going to be doing this time and time again over the coming weeks, posted across multiple channels. So you're going to see this on Instagram, you're going to see this on TikTok, you're going to see this on Facebook, and you're going to see this on YouTube. I'm going to do this as live events. This particular rose is a shrub or a bush rose, grown in a pot, but it doesn't matter whether it's grown in a pot or whether it's in the ground. However, for these kind of tutorials where you're up close and personal and you're filming, pouring them when they're in a pot is much easier for me. I get to put a kneeling pad down and I don't have to really be groveling down on the floor. I can get the camera angles right for you. Wanted to talk to you before we start pruning about a few very basics. The first thing is always the equipment. He says reaching for his secateurs. It is so important that you choose the secateur for yourself. I'm a huge advocate of the fact that this is your garden, it is your rules, you do as you want to do. I can only impart pieces of advice from my 30-year-long career and hope that you follow the steps that made life easier for me. Choosing the correct tool for the job will always make your life much easier. It is not abnormal for me to spend at least 6, 7, 8 hours pruning, sometimes 3 or 4 times a week. So these are very important. Choosing the correct tool for the job, keeping them clean, keeping them sanitary, and most importantly keeping them sharp is really important. There are tutorials of how to do that on all of my channels. If you have problems finding any of those videos, do let me know. So you're going to need a good pair of secateurs. I will always choose, incidentally, a bypass secateur where the blade passes the anvil. You get a much cleaner cut from these than you will do an anvil secateur where the blade comes down across the anvil. I find those snag. They're much cheaper, but investing in a really good pair of secateurs will pay you forward in the years to come. For larger stems, you also may need yourself a pair of loppers or a pruning saw. Now the rose behind me, I say, has only been in this pot for 3 years now, so the growth is maximum as thick as my thumb, so I don't need the loppers today. But if I was working on a larger specimen, for instance a climbing or a shrub rose that had been let to go and we were pulling back into some sort of condition, a pair of loppers would be really good. Now Falco do make a pair of loppers, the company that make these do make a pair of loppers. However, I favour these ones from ARS Tools, and these are absolutely exceptional. Nice short handles, so you're nice and close to the body without overstretching the shoulders or really doing too much damage to the neck as well. These are really very good. You're also going to need some gloves. Now this is depending on you. You've seen me work with these an awful lot. These are from Henchman. These are fairly expensive as a glove. They are nice and thick and heavy. However, for this kind of particular task, I find these a little bit cumbersome. As a gardener who works with his hands all the time, I know it sounds silly, but they need a little bit of protection, especially when you're dealing with someone like Elizabeth. If I stand to the side, you'll see she's covered in a multitude of barbs, but I do like to have the dexterity and feeling in my hands, so I do tend to actually favour these recycled bamboo and plastic ones. These are really good. They're slightly plasticky, but they're nice and cool, they're nice and stretchy. It enables me to have the dexterity and the handling in my fingers and my thumbs. I know where my digits are, so I do tend to wear these quite a lot, especially when pruning, but it does stop them just catching your clothing and also your wrists, which is really quite nasty. Right, moving on. There are several people out there that are going to tell you that it's not particularly important to pay attention to your form when pruning. As a really well experienced and very seasoned gardener, so I've been doing this for a very long time, there are small things that you can do during your pruning which are really going to help your plant long term. Paying close attention to the structure of your plant, emptying out the center of a shrub or bush rose to allow lots of light and air circulation, creating a goblet shape with a space in the middle, will help no end with the prevention of disease, especially mold, mildew and black spot. We're going to be focusing today on opening up the center of this particular plant like it would be if I was pruning a currant or a gooseberry bush. That's where this technique comes from. Always sourcing and choosing an outward facing bud on a strong stem which is going to be able to support not only growth but also flowers in the future is really important. Many people will be telling you that paying attention to the angle of your cut is not particularly important. However, choosing an outward facing bud and encouraging the plant to grow outwards from that empty bowl in the center is really very important. We're going to be trying wherever possible to keep our cuts at around a 45-degree angle. This is something that you don't need to pay attention to, but I will challenge you to have a look at your cuts in about 3 or 4 years and see whether you've actually caused yourself a problem. Failure to bring your cuts into the right angle will result in this kind of growth. And you can see here, I haven't angled my cut properly. This is one of my cuts, so I'm responsible for this. And you can see the hollowing out in the center of the stem now. That's actually caused this particular stem, which was off the Queen of Sweden incidentally, to actually die back. And again, here again, where I haven't angled the cut is flat. There's water droplets been sat on the top of that particular stem and that's rotted that out, completely hollowing out the middle and then causing this stem to die. So it is really important that when you choose your outward facing bud, you're angling your secateurs ever so slightly, 35-45 degrees, allowing the water to run off of that cut, and hopefully that bud at the top is untouched and then the water runs off and the stem doesn't rot. Now this particular plant behind me is really strong and healthy. I haven't got any dead, diseased or dying wood to show, which is another reason why I have these here. Let's cut a stem off of Elizabeth for you. I haven't got my gloves on, so I need to be a bit careful because she's very spiky. So the first stages we're going to go through as we work our way through the plant, whether it's a very new plant or whether it's a well established plant like the one behind me, is we're going to remove the dead, the disease, the dying and the crossing, including the weak. Now, dead wood looks like this. You can see there's no colour to it whatsoever. It's very dull. It feels very papery in the hands. And if I took my secateurs like this and I simply scraped a piece of bark off from underneath, you'll see it's black and brown. There's no signs of life there whatsoever. So dead, diseased and dying wood is very easy to identify, especially when you line it up with a fresh growth that is green and healthy. Not only does this have lots of shoots and buds coming off of it, but you can actually see it's bright green. And if I take my secateurs, I say I need to be careful because I'm not wearing my gloves yet, ouch. And just remove a small amount of the bark, you'll see underneath the bark layer there, nice and green and healthy. That is the layer underneath the bark that actually translocates water up and down the stems and keeps the plant alive. So that's the highways that are moving starch and water around the plant and keeping it healthy and alive. So to begin with, we're going to remove the dead, the disease, the dying and the crossing, and then we're going to prune our rows. So if you'll excuse me for a second while I just get you into location, I'm going to move the camera angle just a little bit. I have a kneeling pad already set up. Just going to drop you down and then we're going to actually start pruning this rose together. I say this is Elizabeth, launched by David Austin in 2002, I believe. Hopefully that should give you the camera angle that you need. And this rose has been in this pot ever since it was planted. You can see that she's very spiky indeed, and I've been leaving this one quite tall. This is a really quite large specimen which needs a little bit of support. It's a really lovely rose with delicate pink flowers with lovely yellow and apricot tinges to it. Right, so we said we were going to remove the dead, the disease, the dying and the crossing first. Now, I don't have any dead, I don't have any disease, but I do have a little bit of crossing growth. You can see in the middle of the plant just here, there is a stem that has coming back from one of these main stems and growing straight through the middle of the plant. What I want to do is I want to remove that nice and cleanly to exactly where it came from. Again, opening up that middle space. A little point of interest as well, never allow your clippings to fall on the floor. I like to keep a bucket with me at all times, or put them into a sheet or straight on into a wheelbarrow. Allowing your cuttings to fall to the floor will unfortunately mean that you end up at another time being bitten by something else. So what I've done is I've removed that stem from the center, and you can now see I can get my hand quite naturally in the middle of this plant. I've got another stem here which is coming towards the center of the plant, nice clean cut, remove that completely, and I've also got one here as well which I'm going to remove completely as well, back to exactly where it came from, nice and easy. Sometimes you have to cut your stems up just a little bit, and you can all of a sudden see I've got a nice open clear space right in the middle of the plant, which means there's plenty of airflow, plenty of light and air circulation in the middle there, hopefully alleviating an awful lot of the disease problems that this particular plant might get. So increasing the airflow will make sure that there's not cold, damp air sat around the plant, which is going to encourage it to get mold, mildew and black spot. Right, after we've removed the dead, the disease, the dying and the crossing, we're then going to start shortening back these stems. And you can see I prepared this particular plant for winter by removing just a third of the growth back in November. That stops it rocking about and getting caught by the wind, and we now need to start thinking about shortening this growth back and creating our permanent framework. And this gets much easier as the plant gets much larger and you have much more media to work with. This particular plant, let's say now 3 years old, I'm going to be selecting strong outward facing buds, keeping my secateurs at around a 35 to 45 degree angle with the bud at the top. You want to allow yourself, I can tell you what, let's cut a bit and I shall show you nice and close to the camera. You want to allow yourself a little bit of space. Imagine this was still attached to the plant here. This is the bud that I'm selecting, the outward facing bud. I want to angle my secateurs like this around 6 or 7 millimeters away from the bud to make sure the anvil or the blade doesn't actually cut it, and I want to simply remove that. Now, it wasn't a very good cut because I'm cutting the wrong way around, but you see the principle. The bud is remaining at the top, nice sloping cut away from with the bud at the top away, which means the water will run off. Right, let's get on and prune this particular plant. So we're going to be selecting outward facing buds, and we're simply going to remove all of the stems back, creating a permanent framework. Now, the permanent framework you create is entirely up to you. I like to leave mine a little bit taller. I don't like to bend down to sniff or pick roses if I can really help it. So my permanent frameworks tend to be a little bit taller than a lot of people's. A lot of people keep them down to about 12 to 15 inches. I'm not shy of bringing mine up to 18 to 20 inches, but you do you at the end of the day, and you create the permanent framework that works for you. Mine is going to be, I say, up to about here. Nice height for me to work at, nice height for me to bend down. This particular plant is going to produce about 2 to 3 feet of growth per year, meaning that the growth is going to be nicely balanced in the pot. So we're selecting nice strong outward facing buds with our secateurs at our nice angle. I'm simply going to remove these stems back and just prune them away. I say any dead, diseased or dying wood needs to be removed at this stage. Don't be afraid of going back to a cut, and always have another look at it if you want to. You never ever achieve perfection in the first year. Sometimes it takes you 3 or 4 years to actually create the permanent framework you're looking for. People often look at me when I'm pruning and I'll be sort of chanting. I don't know I do it. I'm actually in my head repeating the same phrase all the time: outward facing bud, secateurs at the correct angle. And even after all these years, I find it actually helpful to go through those stages in my head. But I think it's very important that you do it. Again, just removing those stems. Try keep your anvil and your blade away from the buds so you don't actually crush them. As I say, it's not a problem if you make a cut that's a little on the lengthy side, you want to go back and shorten the growth at another time, you can always go back and take some off. You obviously can't put it back on. And this is what I mean by some growth being particularly difficult to identify. The bud is just there, but it's very difficult to see because Elizabeth is so spiky. I'm going to leave that one up there. Now these bits over here are a little bit on the spindly side. These stems are quite weak, and actually that one is actually damaged. So we're going to remove that one from the completely, and these other ones we're going to cut back nice and hard to try and stimulate some strong and very stable growth over the next couple of weeks and months. Again, move your way around the plant, manipulate the stems if you have to, and there, she is pretty much done. Now at this stage, what I would like to do is, if there is any growth left, and this does have a few leaves on them, they're actually all very in good condition, but make sure you have a good look at your plant and make sure it's not harbouring any growth that you don't want it to. It's not harbouring any insects that you don't want to be there. And at this stage, if it was, I would remove those leaves completely if there was any sign of any green fly, black fly or aphid on there, which there isn't any of. So I'm going to leave those alone for the time being. Now the rose is actually pruned, it's the perfect time to go ahead and give it a good feed. For those of you that follow along closely, you'll know that I absolutely detest the use of any chemicals in the garden. You won't find me using chemical feeds anywhere. I rely very heavily on mulches and soil conditioners. Anything that says the word compost is not the same as a soil conditioner or as a soil conditioner. Compost as a general rule will contain peat, and we don't want to be using peat for environmental reasons. It is also completely null and void of any nutritional value whatsoever. Anything that any nutritional value peat actually has in it is artificially added, and once again it is a chemical. Peat is completely null and void of any nutritional value whatsoever, but it's a great media for growing things in, but it should only be used in small quantities for growing seeds and potting on plants. Things like this particular rose that have been in this pot for a couple of years need a really good feed, and you can do it in 1 or 2 or 3 ways. You can either add a slow release pelleted fertilizer, which is really good for pot grown specimens. You can give it a liquid feed. Now liquid feeds are available to the plant immediately. They want to be applied during the growing season when the plant is actively looking for nutrients. Then it's absolutely pointless doing that now. The plant is absolutely not growing, it doesn't need anything, and if you applied a liquid feed fertilizer now, it would simply be washed away and disappear. And you all know that I prefer the Envy Seafeed Extra, which is a seaweed based organic fertilizer which is high in potassium, nitrogen and phosphorus, which is really good for flowering plants. However, I normally rely exclusively on things like this, which is a soil conditioner. This is basically homemade compost produced on a grand scale, a commercial scale, and this is really good for adding at this time of year. Anywhere from the end of January all the way through to the beginning part of April is the perfect time to get out and mulch, and these potted roses like this is the perfect time to actually get your mulches on. What I'm going to do is, with my hands, obviously I'm wearing my gloves, I'm going to remove around 3 to 4 inches, about 7 to 10 centimeters of soil from the top of the pot, simply with my hands, and I'm going to replace it with fresh growing media. That is the soil conditioner. You can use well-rotted horse manure, you can use well-rotted cow manure, homemade leaf mulch, homemade compost, whichever you want to use, but you must make sure it is fully organic and packed full of nutrients that your plant needs. And once I've removed that compost, all I'm then going to do is replenish the top of the pot. This growing media will slowly, over the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks, release its nutritional value back down into the pot, meaning this plant has absolutely everything it needs to grow when it needs it. So applying this now is really good. Good couple of handfuls. Spread that out nicely, leaving yourself, if you're growing in a pot, a nice trap for water at the very top. You want to make sure that you have plenty of room for watering at the top, because this will be watered with a whole watering can of water every 2 or 3 days during the growing season. But there it is, all done and pruned. If you have any queries or questions about my pruning regime, about my pruning techniques, don't hesitate to leave me a comment below, or watch any one of the other videos that will be posted over the next couple of weeks, or any one of the ones that have been posted after the last few years. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you all again very soon. Take care now. Bye bye.